Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Lion here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're doing another comic book review. Today we're going to be looking at book 1 of Ultraman. This is technically the first arc in the story, although you could read all 3 books that are available right now as a single story if you wanted to, but there is like a clear ending here where this would be like the end of the movie, right? So here's Rise of Ultraman, book 1 in the Ultraman series by Marvel so far. It's written by Kyle Higgins and Matt Groom, and if you're a fan of tokusatsu comic books, you'll know these guys. They're the guys that did Power Rangers, and they're doing stuff for the Massiverse with Radiant Black. And I can't remember if Matt Groom does work with Ryan Parrott on Rogue Sun, or if he does something differently with Radiant Black. I can't remember, but these guys are all friends. They all work on the same kind of stuff here. The artist for this book is called Francesco Manna, and the colorist here is Espen Grundetterger, I guess. Grundettern. Espen Grundet, J-E-E-R-N, right? So I'm not really sure how to say that. I think this is like a Scandinavian name, and that J would be like an I sound, but that's a bit too complicated for me to say, right? So this is published by Marvel, as you guys can see right there, and on the side here at the bottom. I hope that this gets collected into a thick paperback or into a smaller omnibus. I think that'd be good, but who knows when that'll happen. They have a currently ongoing series right now, and I'm sure that they'll have more afterwards because there has been a lot of work done to bring Ultraman comics to the West here in the last couple of years, right? So the demographic here, I would call it YA. It's called Teen Plus by Marvel. That's what they labeled it here on the back of the book. And I think that fits. The genres here are tokusatsu, superhero, and sci-fi. It does not have an adaptation, although this would be a great animated movie, especially after the success of Ultraman Rising. And the rating for this story is a 4 out of 5 for me. I had a lot of fun with this. So the premise for this story is basically a new retelling of Ultraman with more of a superhero lean than Ultraman previously had, because Ultraman is technically a superhero, but the way that Japan makes superheroes, right, in the sense that like their tokusatsu characters are superheroes, right? Ultraman and Super Sentai and Kamen Rider and all these characters are superheroes, but the way that their stories are told is significantly different from how stories about superheroes are told here in the States, right? And so this Ultraman has more of a Western style superhero storytelling vibe to it than previous iterations, and I think that's interesting. Maybe, you know, people that are bigger fans of Ultraman might disagree with me on that. That's totally fine. I get it. But for me, this really felt a bit more like American superhero than anything I've ever experienced from Ultraman before, right? Which isn't much. So it's fair if you disagree there. So it opens up in 1966, which is when the original Ultraman story happened. We have this guy called Moriboshi in a big jet over these mountains, when suddenly something explodes. Something happens. A man, an orange ball, and then this thing that looks like an Ultraman show up, and then it all fades to black, and we move on to 2020. This is supposed to be basically telling us that this story is not going to happen the way that the original TV show happened, right? It does happen, or it does have an initial start point that is the same, 1966, but our story is going to focus on modern characters in 2020 that are going to go through this journey to be Ultraman, right? So in 2020, we focus on a young woman who gets dropped off at a building. She walks through this illusion and ends up at the headquarters of the USP, which is the Unified Science Patrol or something like that. It's basically this United Science Patrol. It's this worldwide organization that is supposed to deal with kaiju that have been starting to happen and starting to show up in the last couple, decades since 1966. She talks to her boss. She's sent to help this other guy called Muramatsu, who is a captain in the patrol force, and she gets roped into a kaiju hunt with him. It's small. They shoot it, and then Shin Hayata, which is the name of the character that ultimately bonds with Ultraman in the original series, shows up, and this is a new version of him. He is a young man, friends with this young woman, and when he shows up to help, he and Fuji, the young woman, end up following Muramatsu's lead and actually end up having some issues later, right? So we see that Fuji and Shin have a long-term friendship. They both wanted to join the defense force at the same time, or the patrol force, and only Fuji was able to. Shin, for whatever reason, was not accepted. He wants to get back into it, but it's not really working, and there is some tension between them. We learn that they managed to get through their tension, but are ultimately still kind of there's a little bit of friction between them because of it, right? It's understandable. If you and your friend had planned to do something and then only one of you gets it, the other one is definitely going to be upset, and that's understandable, right? We come back to the United Science Patrol's headquarters, where we see that somewhere else a laser shoots a giant sphere out of the sky. Fuji gets called in by Muramatsu. Shin happens to be with her at the time, so he joins her, and then Shin is pressured by Muramatsu to shoot the sphere with their special USP guns. And what happens is that basically Muramatsu is getting Shin to do it, so that if something happens, it's not his fault, or at least that's kind of how it reads to me. And what happens is that as Shin shoots the sphere, he damages it, and it crashes down into the earth and absorbs him. And he ends up realizing that it's hurt. He walks into it, he gets absorbed into it, and then we get these flashbacks as we get to see Shin and the being merge. And outside of the sphere, Fuji and Muramatsu argue about the fact that Muramatsu's directly responsible for Shin's death, right? Because they don't know what's going to happen to him, so they assume he's dead. And we get to see that inside the sphere, Shin and this creature, this man, this Ultraman, or this Ultra, I guess is what they're called, are interacting. And the Ultra explains what he is. He is a enlightened being. He is an alien life form that has ascended beyond the mortal coil and now has these special abilities, and alongside the rest of the members of his race, they travel across space and time to try to help people deal with these kaiju incursions that happen when societies have too much negative energy to them, right? And the Ultra now is damaged, and he needs to merge with Shin in order to basically find some semblance of his power again. And Shin has to lend him his body and gain something from it as well. While this is happening, we see that Fuji and Muramatsu, go to a farmhouse. They find the giant laser. They get attacked by the USP, and then find this guy called Yamamoto. And Shin wakes up inside the USP later, a few days later, I think. The sphere absorbed into himself, and he's fine now, but he's under surveillance, right? And he's manipulated by the leader of the USP to do a job for them. And so he goes to find Fuji. He finds out that she's in danger, and he becomes Ultraman to save her. He has a fight with a kaiju. It's really, really awesome. Yamamoto zaps Fuji with one of the USP guns, and he sends her to the kaiju phantom zone or something like that. It's basically this limbo area. And now she's in the kaiju negative zone, basically. And so Shin has to go save her, but he can't yet. And so the leader of the USP and Yamamoto meet again, forced to by Shin Hayata, and they are forced to work together in order to get Shin into the kaiju zone and to save Fuji, right? So they managed to do this. It's really, really cool. We get to see Belomar, who is the original kaiju that fought Ultraman. They break out of the kaiju prison or kaiju phantom zone or whatever, and Ultraman must upsize, become giant in order to fight Belomar. And it's a really awesome ending here. The fight was really, really great. I really, really enjoyed it. But of course, there's going to be a lot of possible ramifications because of this, because of the way in which Fuji was saved, which is by destroying the containment unit around the kaiju zone, and so releasing all of the kaiju back into the world. And in order to get rid of them properly this time, Ultraman has to go on the offensive and needs the support of the USP, right? And this is problematic because this is not what the USP wanted to do, right? So that's the end of the story there. There's a few backup stories here. So there's one called Kaiju Steps, which is a really cute, kind of just like infomercial type thing. And then there's Ultra Q, which is telling us the origins of the USP as they happen in Paris. It ties into the start of the next story. And overall, this was a really awesome story because Ultra Q is the name of the show that eventually became Ultraman. Ultra Q was supposed to be a Japanese version of something like... I can't remember the name of the show at this point, but it was supposed to be something like an episodic kind of like mystery, horror, sci-fi type show. And when they realized that it wasn't really going to work, they decided to change it into Ultraman, and so Ultraman was born, right? And so this is kind of like that, and it has a really nice old school aesthetic to it that I really, really enjoy. So I recommend you read everything, not just the main storyline. In terms of characters here, we have Kiki Fuji, who is our ride-along character. We have Shin Hayata, who is our hero character. We have Captain Muramatsu, who is the older character that isn't necessarily a bad guy, but isn't really a good guy either. We have Director Ide, who's basically the villain of this story. And we have Yamamoto, who is also kind of a villain character, but he's ultimately a jilted scientist that is upset with the way that his creations were used, right? In terms of world building, we get the USP, who's the United Science Patrol. And this is different from what the Japanese version is called, I think. It's also different from the Ultraman manga, but it's basically a defense force of some sort, right? We have the Kaiju Phantom Zone. It's not good. It's this weird limbo place, and it's filled up, and it's going to burst, and that's why they choose to do what they choose to do. The Kaiju exist across the multiverse. They feed on dark emotions. Ultras are ascended beings that intervene where needed, and there's this thing called the Kaiju Cascade, which is when a whole world reaches a level of negative energy so high that Kaiju just constantly spawn. Right, and it's basically similar to when Pacific Rim had the multiple events happening at the same time. It's the same idea, right? So world building wise, it's pretty simple stuff, but really, really well done, and it's explained very, very nicely. In terms of artwork, I think that there's no complaints here. I really, really enjoy it. I think it looks awesome. It's really, really wonderful. Let me see if I can show you a few images here because usually comic books aren't likely to get my channel taken away if I show them. So here's the introduction of the Ultraman from the Sphere. Here's the first time Ultraman happens. Here's Belumar. Or Bebular, I think is how you say that correctly. And here's some general action shots of the fighting. It's really, really fun. It's really well done. I really think Francesco Manna did a great job with this. So yeah, in terms of fan service, there's none. There's no sexy outfits. There's no voluptuous characters. There's nothing particularly, sexy about anything. I mean, the characters are all pretty, but that's just because they're drawn, right? They're meant to be attractive. But there's nothing particularly, extra beyond that, which is pretty interesting because this is technically something based on a Japanese medium, and having that sort of fan service would be expected. But because it's Ultraman, I probably think that they toned it down because that's not really, in line with what Ultraman really focuses on. So it makes sense. There really is no complaints here. The artwork is phenomenal either way. So you'll still like it. It'll still look pretty, right? So yeah, like I said, the rating for this is a 4 out of 5. I think it's nearly perfect, but I feel like it could have been longer. I think that things could have been explained a little bit better. Even if everything was clear eventually, initially some of the stuff was kind of, not that great. And I like the inclusion of Fuji, but if I remember correctly, she's not really a character that shows up in the original Ultraman. At least I don't remember from any of the readings that I've done if she's in there. And I guess this is more like she's a supporting cast, but because of the way that the story starts, she actually ends up being the main character for this first book, with the transition going over to Shin Hayata being the main character going forward. And so it's a bit weird. And so that kind of knocks it down a little bit for me. But broadly speaking, I like it. I think it's cool. And I wonder if Fuji will get to have some powers as well at some point, right? Because this doesn't necessarily have to be like the Japanese Ultraman. It can kind of do different things, right? So I wonder if we'll get an Ultra Woman, and that would be really, really cool, right? So yeah, those are my thoughts on Rise of Ultraman, book 1 in the Ultraman series by Marvel. Let me know what you thought down below. Have you read this story? Are you really, willing to check it out? Let me know in the comments, and thank you guys so much for watching. See you guys later.